Guys, welcome back to Python for Complete Beginners, and this is episode 2. Today, I want to talk about something very, very important in programming and in computing generally, which is data types and variables. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, if you remember in the last class, I showed you how to start up your Anaconda Navigator and also start your Jupyter Lab. And we created our very first notebook file. So today we're going to be creating a new notebook file in that same directory where we created the previous one. So you just click on the plus button here and you click on Python 3 on that notebook. And the first thing you want to do before you get started with coding is to rename this by right-clicking on this and then click on rename. Change this to episode 2 _2 and then enter. Now we can proceed to programming. Now let's start with data types, right? Now, when it comes to programming, you'll be working with data all the time. In fact, when it comes to working with computers, you'll be working with data all the time. After all, if you're asked to define what a computer is, you would say something like it is a machine that processes, accepts data, and then outputs process data, right? So data is something that will always keep popping out when it comes to computers and programming. So it's really something that belongs to the fundamentals and basic of computing that you need to understand if you really want to go deep into development, right? All right, so there are several types of data in Python. I'm going to start with the three most important and most basic ones, right? Which are, so the first one we have is string. The second one we have is integer, sometimes referred to as ints, abbreviated as ints. And then for string, most times you see it as str. And then finally we have float. So these are all like basic data types we have in Python. Like I said, there are other types, but we're going to stick to this for now. So a brief explanation of all these data types. Now, when we talk about string, this is usually used to represent any letter, any symbol, or any number, right? It could be a single character belonging to any of these things or a bunch of characters put together. So what do I mean? So let's say you want to write somebody's name, you want to like Daniel. Daniel here is string. You can have password 123. You can see that this contains both numbers and letters, so it's still the string. And you can have something like asterisk and password. This is also a string also. So strings could be combination of any character, be it symbol, be it letter, be it numbers. Sometimes it could be a single character, like let's say just C or something, right? Now, the major takeaway here is that whenever a string is represented in Python, it is usually in quotes. So that's the best way to spot a string. Whenever you see something that has a quote in front and behind, then that is a string. So let's proceed to integer. So for integer, we have just numbers, regular numbers. It could be negative numbers, it could be positive numbers. As long as it's a number without a decimal point, then it belongs to integer. So let's say 4, 5, minus 4, minus 5. These are all examples of integer. So it's just regular numbers, negative or positive, as long as there is no fractional parts or decimal parts to it. Now, float is a data type that covers for decimal numbers with points. So an example will be 4.7, 3.6. You could even have negative numbers for float also. So these are all examples of floats. So string, integer, and float. String are just characters put together, and they're always in quotes. Integers are regular numbers, positive or negative, while floats are just numbers with decimal points or with fractional parts. Now, before I proceed, there's something I need to explain. All right. So in Python, every single thing is referred to as an object. In Python, every single thing is referred to as an object, be it a function, be it a data, whatever it is called an object, right? And objects are grouped in classes. So we have objects that belong to the same class. What do I mean by this? For instance, if you have the data 4, the data 6, and the data 7, these are three different objects. 4 is an object, 6 is an object, 7 is an object, right? But because they all belong to the class of integer, technically we say these are objects belonging to the class of integer because they're all integer numbers, right? Now when you have something like 4.5 minus 5.5, 4.5 minus 5.5 here are objects belonging to the class of floats, right? So we group objects in classes, right? Now one thing you need to know is that objects belonging to the same class, we have the same exact attributes and behavior. What do I mean by attributes and behavior? Now, take for instance, I'm going to just move to the next cell, right? Ignore whatever is executed here, right? So in Jupyter Lab, whenever you are coding and you didn't write any instruction per se like that, it just prints out the last line, right? So this is just a Jupyter Lab thing. So technically we add no code here actually. So let's proceed here. So what I want to show you is how objects belonging to different classes have different attributes. For instance, if I go ahead to do something like 3 plus 5, now we know that 3 is integer, meaning that 3 is an object that belongs to the class of integer, and 5 is integer also, right? So we have two integers here. Now when you try to use the addition operator, this is referred to as addition operator in Python. Whenever you try to use this with integers, what you get is an actual mathematical sum, right? So 3 plus 5 is going to give us 8, right? That is expected, right? Good. Now it means that whenever you try to use the plus operator or the addition operator on two integers, what you get is a mathematical sum, which is very obvious. Now what happens when we try to use the plus operator or the addition operator on two strings? Let's say Dan plus IEL, something like this, right? Now this mathematically is not possible, right? So when we try to execute this code, what we get is something we call concatenation. So concatenation just means placing two strings side by side or placing two objects side by side. So you can see that Dan has been placed to the side of IEL, right? And then we have Daniel. Now this shows that objects belonging to the class of string respond in a different way entirely whenever you use the plus operator on them compared to objects belonging to the class of ints. So this is what I mean by objects having different attributes as long as they're in different classes, right? Now there might be similar attributes across classes, right? But as long as the object belongs to a specific class, it is, it has a specific attribute. And when we try this plus on floats, just like integer, we're going to get the same results, right? So this is going to give us 4.7, right? So it means that float and integer have the same behavior when it comes to the addition operator, right? Even though they don't belong to the same class, right? So it means that there's some similarities across classes sometimes. Now let's try what happens when we try to print. Or let me just come here and edit this too. Let's try multiplication, right? So in Python, you use asterisk sign for multiplication. So what you get is can't multiply a sequence by a non-integer type string. So you get an error, right? Now there are some certain operation that is not supported with a specific kind of object, right? In this case, the multiplication operator is not supported whenever you have a string and a string, right? So that's why we're having a type error, because the problem here is the type of data we are trying to perform this operation on. That's why this is called a type error. Now look at this. If I try to let's say subtract, right? I get a type error also. Now it says that unsupported operand types, right? Operands here are than and IEL, right? And the operator is the minus operator, right? And it's saying that these operands do not support the minus operator, right? But in the case of string and float, obviously we're going to get the results because objects belonging to the class of integer or class of floats supports that particular operator. Now, this is what I mean by different objects belonging to different classes having different attributes. Very, very important to note this, right? Because by the time you know the class that the object belongs to, an object belongs to, then you can, kind of tell kind of attributes it's going to have. All right, so let's proceed with something more interesting, which is variables. Now, there is no how you talk about data without talking about variables in computer programming because they are closely related, right? Now, if you're going to work with data in computers or in programming, somehow you get to a point where you have to save that data and then retrieve the data later, right? And that's where variable comes into the picture. So variables are just simply storage location on your computer where data can be stored. Think about it as your pocket where you can put anything you want to put, right? Whenever you put an object inside a variable or a data inside of a variable, you are technically putting that data somewhere in your computer memory, in your computer RAM. You understand? So how do you go about this? Now let's say, for instance, I want to create 3 variables. A variable to hold the person's name, a variable to hold the person's age, and a variable to hold the person's height. So I'm going to say name equal to, let's say the person's name is Felix, and the person's age is 45, and the person's height is 7.8. Now what I'm doing here is creating a variable. Let's start with the first line here. I'm creating a variable and I decided to call that variable name. You can call your variable anything, it could be anything, right? And then in that variable I'm assigning or saving the value Felix in that variable. So we use this equal to sign. It's called an assignment operator here in Python. So what it does is that it takes the right hand side and assign it to the left hand side. In this case we are assigning the object, which is an object that belongs to the class of string. I'm saving that or assigning that to a variable called name. I'm doing the same thing here, but this time around this is an integer. The same thing here, this is a float. So what this means is this: if I execute this cell, actually you do not see anything printed out on the screen, right? Because we don't have any print function here. But something has happened behind the scene. What has happened? Felix 45 and 7.8 has been saved in the computer somewhere, right? You don't need to know exactly where it has been saved, right? It's somewhere in your computer memory. Now that's the reason why you need to name your variables, right? So the variable name is how you retrieve the data back or the object back. So let's say, for instance, I need the name of the person. I want to print that out on the screen. I can say print name and I get Felix. And I can do this in any point in my code. I can do it again. I can say print name again. And I get Felix again. So because this Felix has been saved somewhere in my memory, right? And the name of the variable holding that Felix is name. So anytime I need Felix, I can always refer to that variable. So you can see the importance of variable now. So let's try something like print age. So I want to do print age, comma, height. So I'm trying to print both age and height now. So I'm getting 45, 7.8. Remember that the print function can accept more than one argument. Now, please note, there's a difference between this guy here and this guy here. Now the difference is that here I am printing the object saved in a variable name, right? Saved in a variable name. But here I'm actually printing the string name. So there are two different things. Here, I'm not printing NAME as a string, but I'm trying to refer to the object save in name. So if I run this code here, I get name instead of Felix. Very, very important. So that's the reason why you need to quote your string, because that's the only way the computer can recognize that, oh, this is a string. Okay, so let's play around with these variables and the print function. I can do something like this. My name is, that is one argument. Then I put name here. I can say, and okay, sorry, and I am age years. Age years. Let's do it this way. Age years old. Let's run this and let's see. All right, so my name is Felix and I am 45 years old. Now, can you see what I did here? I'm taking advantage of the fact that the print function can access multiple arguments. So the first argument is my name is, this is a regular string. This string is not saved anywhere in a variable. I'm just inputting it directly, right? There's a name, which is a variable. There's another string, a variable, and then a string. And this all will be printed as a single string, right? It's almost like a concatenation also. But the difference is that whenever you have multiple arguments passed to the print function, in between those arguments you get a space, right? So my name is, you can see that there's a space between my name is and Felix, right? It is different from when you do something like print my name is and I say plus name. Now remember that my name is the string and name here is a variable that contains a string, right? So technically what you're doing here is you're trying to plus a string and a string. And remember, when you try to plus a string and a string, what you get is a concatenation. So technically I'm going to get my name is Felix, right? But notice that there is no space between the is and Felix. That's because whenever you concatenate, there is no additional character attached. There's no space attached, right? But whenever you pass this as several arguments, or sorry, different arguments into the print function, you get a space automatically, even without the space here. So if I do something like this, I'm still going to get the same space here that is in between it. You understand? So that's the difference between this and this. It's very important to note that, because a lot of people make this mistake. Now, one way to correct this here is to put the space after the is, right? And then run this. So now you have the space here. All right. So that's how you work with data types, and these are the basic data types in Python. Now let's do something new. Since the last class in episode 1, I've only introduced you to a particular function, which is a print function. And I told you there are several functions in Python. There are several inbuilt functions that Python has, right? You can even create new functions, but we'll get to that later. Now, it's a very interesting function I want to talk about, and it's called the input function. So let's talk about that. Input, no, not the input function. Let's start with the type function first. I'll get to the input function later. Now, if you remember clearly, in the first episode, I'm going to bring out that code, right? I talked about functions having three things, right? The function name, the input, which is the argument, and the return value. But I've never actually explained what the return value is, right? So let's go back to episode 2. Now, what do we mean by return value? Now, there are some functions that, when they are executed, they need to return a response back to whoever called the function. So what I mean is this: if I ask you to go to the market and get me something, right, and I give you all the required arguments you need to buy that thing, by the time you come back from the market, I am expecting you to give me whatever it is that I send you to buy, right? So that task, or that function I'm giving you to do, requires you to return a value to me, requires you to return a response to me. If I tell you to go and check if my TV is on in the sitting room, I expect you to come back and tell me, oh, the TV is on, or the TV is not on. So there are some functions that is required, or that requires a response, a return value. Now in Python, an example of that function is a type function. So the type function, I'm going to do something. Remember, we have variables declared above here, right? So I'm going to say type age, and I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to say age type, and I'm going to go ahead and shift enter. Now nothing happens, right? But what I've done here is this. I'm calling the type function, and the type function takes only one argument. Compared to the print function that takes multiple arguments, only one argument can be passed to the type function at a time. And the argument it takes is basically any object, any Python object. Now, what the type function does is this. It tells you what kind of object that object given to it is, right? It tells you the class that object belongs to. Now, we know that age here is declared as 45. Yes, it's 45, remember? So it means that age here belongs to the class of integer. So let's see if type can actually give us that information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to print age type, and something interesting is going to happen. Class int, which means class integer. Now what does this mean? Now what I've done is this. Remember, this is just a variable, right? And then I have the equal to sign in front of it, right? Meaning I'm about to assign a value or save a value inside that variable. Now, because I know that the type function is a function that returns a value, gives me a response. It tells me whatever data type the object given to it as an argument is. In this case, it tells me that age is an integer, right? It's an integer rather. So, in order for me to get the response that type returns back to me, I need to save that response somewhere in my computer memory, right? And I'm saving it inside this variable by assigning it. So now, technically, the response of type has been saved into age type, and that's why I can print it out. Now, this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is this. I can just say print type, then let's say height. I know height is float, so let's say height, and I run this. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's an error here. Now, the error is because I did not end the second bracket here. So, class floats. Now, instead of saving the return value of type like I did here, I'm just passing that return value directly into the print function as an argument. So this way I'm saving my memory. Now you use this method if you only need that information once. You don't plan to retrieve it back in the future, right? So if I run this, I get class float because height belongs to the class of float. Now the problem is that I can never get this information again until I run this same code. However, in this case, I've already saved the type of age, right? So I can, at any point in time, print type underscore age. Sorry, age type, right? Now, I think it's good that this happened actually. Now, let's read this error. The error says name type age is not defined. Now, this is happening because there is no variable called type age. The variable is actually called age type. So, Python do not recognize this variable because this variable has not been defined or declared somewhere. So, that's one thing about Python. Whenever you make mistakes and you get error, the error is usually very, very straightforward. It tells you exactly what the problem is. As long as you can read English, you can figure out where the error is coming from. Alright, so that's the type function. So now you know about functions that have return values and how to cache all those return values. You can either pass the return value to another function as an argument, or you can save the return value in a variable, then use that later. Now, let's move to the input function. I'm going to just briefly explain the input function and go around this particular episode. But this is interesting actually. So the input function is similar to the type function in the sense that it also has a return value. And this is how it works. So let's say location. I'm going to create a variable called location. I'm going to say inputs, and I'm going to pass in an argument which is going to be a string. Where do you stay? Let's do it that way. Where do you stay? Alright, now if I run this code, something interesting is going to happen. I get a text box that tells me where do you stay, and basically I can type into this text box. So think about your WhatsApp or your Instagram or any other chat application you have on your system, right? Where you can chat with people. Now it is something like this that's happening behind the scene. So in your WhatsApp programming, in your Messenger programming, there's something like an input function that allows you to enter messages, right? So if you are creating a program, like a chat program, you can use the input function. So the input function allows you to capture data from the user of the program. So The idea is that the whole idea of this programming is like you want to package this programming eventually and allow people to use it, right? So this says, where do you stay? I can say I stay in USA. Let me put it that way, right? And I press enter. Now that is all, nothing happened, right? However, by the time you go ahead and now print location, you get USA. And let's try something interesting. Let's confirm what data type USA is. Location. Okay, string. Now, I'm going to take it back a little bit. Now, what is happening here is this: the input function allows you to capture data, any kind of data. It could be a string, an int, a float, whatever the person types is going to be captured by the input function, right? Then in this case, the input function is going to return that value that has been typed to me, and I am accessing that value and saving that value inside a variable called location. Now whenever I run this code, I'm going to run it again, shift enter. It's asking me where do you stay. Now the argument of the input function is going to be the question that's going to pop out whenever you run the input function. So I can change this to where do you work. Now this is something I need to point out. Now I've edited this code, but the truth is that former code is still running here. Now whenever a cell is still being executed, it has not completely execute itself, you're going to see this asterisk sign close to the cell. It means that that cell is still being executed. So at that point in time, you cannot run any other cell. What do I mean? Let's say I try to print out 1 here. You can see that it says cell not executed due to pending input. So now it means that I have to come here and ensure that this cell finishes executing by responding to the question here. So I'm going to go say Lagos here. Good. Now I can come back here and print 1. So that's very important to note. You can also see that the asterisk sign has gone already. Alright, so we'll rerun this code. Remember, I've changed this to work just to show you that you can pass any kind of arguments here. Shift enter, you can see where do you work now. So I have to respond to this if I can proceed doing something else. Lagos. Alright, so you can also, so that's it. The input function, the argument passed to the input function, which is mostly usually a string, is what will be printed out whenever the text box appears. Alright guys, so that's how the input function works. So let's do something interesting, then I'm going to round this up. I'm simply going to do something like input. Okay, let's do something. I'm going to say underscore age, input, how old are you, boss? Right, and I'm going to say immediately after that, I'm going to print out. Wow. So you don't mind my typing. So you are underscore age years old. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to collect a person's age, right? And I'm saving whatever age the person gives to me under this variable, inside this variable called minus underscore age, right? And I'm printing the string wow, so you are. I'm also printing age, which is what is collected here, and then the string years old. So when I run this now, the first thing is asking me, how old are you, boss? I say I'm 70, and enter. I said, wow, so you are 70 years old. And that's the whole for today's episode. Thank you guys for paying attention. This might not look like much, but trust me, with creativity, you can actually use this knowledge of type function, input function, print function, variable and data types to, kickstart your programming journey and do some little nice projects. So I'm going to leave you to that. It's up to you right now to what you do with this information. In the next class, I'm going to talk about some more advanced topic. I'm going to move to talking about the attributes of different classes and how to work with different classes of objects. So I'll see you in the next episode. Please subscribe, kindly like this video, and most importantly, please share the video. I believe this is something very educative, and I'm sure that it is something that will be useful to a lot of people out there. So please do so, and I'll catch you later. Thank you very much.